All right, guys, we are going to get started. Welcome, everybody. It is my pleasure to host today. I believe this is our third webinar on this series. For anyone who has not joined us before, we explore every month a different country's contribution to the Italian campaign. We started in January with India, and we have so far done Australia, New Zealand, Greece, and this past month of May, we were celebrating the Jewish Brigade's contribution, and it is really my pleasure to have Dr. Samuele Rocca here today with us. He's going to talk to us about the Jewish Brigade and the Italian campaign. Before that, Samuele, if you can just go to the next slide, very briefly talk about our mission at the Allies Museum. We are a new museum being established in Rome, dedicated to the 1.2 million men and women from all over the world that came to Italy to liberate the country in World War II. Really the first fighter for freedom and democracy to set foot in Europe. And next slide, please. In terms of our mission statement, we really want to honor the remaining veterans. There's unfortunately less than 1% still alive, and many in their late 90s for obvious time reason. But beside commemorating those who served, we really aim to educate those who are still serving, and to Bob's point earlier, inspire those who will serve in many ways, right? There's many young people across Italy and the world that visit places like here, Rome, and have little to no knowledge that the city was the first European capital to be liberated from Nazi occupation. June 4, 1944, and Italy was, it's a beautiful country that you can obviously really enjoy as a tourist today, but that's thanks to the hundreds of thousands that fought and tens of thousands that paid the ultimate price from all over the world. And think about young people. One thing we want to remember is the average age of the people who fell in Italy was 20 years old. So really, it was a war, unfortunately, fought by young people. And we think that young people today really need to be a little bit more cognizant of the freedom and democracy that they can enjoy thanks to that sacrifice. And with that, next slide. I'm going to introduce Samuele Rocca. Samuele is a senior lecturer at Ariel University at the Faculty of Architecture and a lecturer at Haifa University in Israel. He is a social and military historian. His research focuses on Jews and Judaism in the Hellenistic and Roman periods, as well as military history of the Jews. He has written numerous articles for journals such as the Revue des Etudes Juives, Israel Numismatic Journal, and Athenaeum. He has also written various books, including Herod's Judea, a Mediterranean state in the classical world, published in 2008, La Brigata Ebraica e le unità ebraiche nell'esercito britannico durante la Seconda Guerra Mondiale, which is the Jewish Brigade and the Jewish units inside the British Army during the Second World War, published in 2013. Mai più Masada cadrà, Storia e mito della fortezza di Erode in 2021, and In the Shadow of the Caesar, Jewish Life in Roman Italy in 2022. Samuele co-founded in 2018 in Milan the Museum of the Jewish Brigade, and is a member of its academic board. He takes also part at the Ancient City Project and is a member of its academic board. It's also an associate editor of AOM, AME, the Ancient Mediterranean East, a review focused on the Mediterranean East. And with that, I'm going to kick off this fireside chat today, welcoming you, Samuele. I'm really honored of you joining us. And I'm going to start with the first question regarding the Jewish Brigade. What were the key political, logistical, and ideological factors that led to the formation of the Jewish Brigade in the British Army? And how did this formation reflect the evolving understanding of the Jewish contribution to Allied war effort in World War II?
Good. Well, the origins of the Jewish Brigade group trace back to the outbreak of the war. When Britain declared war on Germany in September 1939, Zionist leader seized the moment as strategic opportunity to establish a Jewish army. David Ben-Gurion, chairman of the Jewish agency that it was the main representative of the Jewish communities living in Palestine, proposed forming a Jewish force within the British military. From 1940 to 1941, Weizmann and Ben-Gurion pushed for a full Jewish division composed of Jews from Britain, the Dominions, and the huge refugee communities. Although the British War Cabinet supported the idea, it was ultimately shelved in October 1941. Realizing British hesitation, Zionist leadership by then had shifted their focus on recruiting locally in Mandate Palestine. A census ordered by Ben-Gurion in 1939 revealed that over 36,000 expressed willingness to enlist in the British Army or in the Palestine police forces. For the Jewish Agency, the war offered not only a chance to contribute to the Allied cause, but also a military capacity under a Jewish flag. This vision, noted by Ilan Ben-Zion, a soldier in the Jewish Brigade, aimed to produce a seasoned soldier capable of fulfilling the strenuous duties of modern warfare. The Jewish volunteers sought to assert a distinct national identity within the British Army, symbolized by the use of Hebrew, Zionist insignia, and aspiration to fly the blue and white flag alongside the Union Jack. Though initially opposed, the British eventually tolerated these expressions, and by late 1943, more than a year before the creation of the Jewish Brigade Group, they formally recognized the right of Jewish volunteers to wear insignia bearing the Star of David. Upon the formation of the Jewish Brigade Group, they were officially granted the right to fly the Zionist flag. Recruiting began immediately after the war outbreak, though the British imposed a strict policy of Jewish-Arab enlistment parity. Early Jewish volunteers served primarily in non-combat roles in the Royal Army Pioneer Corps and in mixed units, including one that saw action in France in 1940. A few joined the Royal Artillery and the Royal Army Medical Corps. After Italy entered the war in 1940, threatening Mandate territory, the Jewish Agency launched its first mass enlistment campaign. This led to the creation of separate Jewish company in the Service Corps, the Engineers, the Buffs, Royalist Kent Regiment, or infantry companies. Jewish volunteers also joined the Royal Air Force. A second recruitment campaign began in 1941, which included enlistment in the Royal Navy. The egalitarian spirit of the Shuv inspired many women to enlist in auxiliary units, such the Auxiliary Territorial Service, the Women Auxiliary Air Force, beginning in January 1942. Here you have a table. You can see the number. More or less, we arrived to more than 30,000, more than 5,000 in the infantry. Then, of course, the supply companies and the engineer, and you arrive almost to 15,000. The rest are auxiliary pioneers. Women, you almost have 4,500 women to join it. Royal Air Force, there were more or less 10 pilots. Royal Navy, Ordnance, then you have various volunteers, the commandos, 240 volunteers, veterans, and intelligence. We cannot be sure completely of this number, and you reach more than 30,000 volunteers. By the end of the 1942, some 20,000 Palestinian Jews were serving in the British Army. The Jewish Agency used a Shuv enlistment order to initiate conscription, but this failed due to lack of legal authority and the mandate government protection of conscientious objectors. There were also them. Meanwhile, dissatisfaction grew within the Shuv. The creation of Jewish battalion in the Palestine Regiment, which remained stationed in mandatory Palestine without advance and training or integration into a broader Zionist military framework, fueled disillusionment. Nevertheless, by 1943, more than 25,000 Jews were in uniform, serving not only in Palestine, but across the Middle East, Egypt, Cyrenaica, Iraq, Cyprus, Lebanon, and far afield as India and Burma, mainly the pilots and the doctors. I'm speaking, of course, of only Palestinian Jews. The enlistment crisis peaked in early 1943, but had largely subsided by summer. From that point onwards, Palestinian Jewish units, including those of the Supplice Company, Engineer, Women ATS, participated actively in the Italian campaign. By war's end, some 30,000 Jews from Mandate Palestine had served in the British Army. In parallel, the Palestine police, recognized as part of the armed force, and those, according to the Geneva Convention, as almost a regular army, organized Jewish volunteers into the so-called Jewish settlement police, which include 200, 500 full-time members and no less than 15,000 part-time reservists. As historian Noav Gelver described, this wave of enlistment was a spontaneous movement of self-fulfillment. Volunteers were driven by a mix of ideological and personal motives: Zionist conviction, experience in Europe, desire for revenge, unemployment, especially strong at the beginning of the war, family hardship, career ambition, and the appeal of travel. As you know, join the army and travel the world. Between 1940 and the British victory at El Alamein, the dominant motivation was the existential threat to the Jews living in Mandate Palestine. After that, motivation shifted. Jewish soldiers increasingly sought combat against the Nazis and opportunities to aid Holocaust survivors. This change, rooted in a report of the mass extermination of European Jewry reaching Palestine in late 1942, was especially pronounced among alien enlistees who had already been serving. In sum, the eventual creation of the Jewish Brigade reflected not only evolving policy, but also the sustained effort of Zionist leadership and the determination of Jewish volunteers to turn military service into a path toward national recognition and future statehood. Want to show you a little more of these volunteers, and behind the Jewish Brigade group, of course, the women, the ATS units, and of course the Jewish settlement police. That is a topic that have still to be studied a little bit more carefully, because once we consider the Jewish settlement police and the Jews serving in other branch of the Palestine police, we arrive to more than 50,000 people that served in the British Armed Force. That is an enormous number, even of course including part-time volunteers. And that means that more or less a tenth of the Jewish population in Palestine during the Second World War served in the army. Now we have to be aware, because when we consider the total number, there are very important shifts. They were pioneer, the same person that first they served in the Pioneer Corps, then they entered in artillery, engineer, infantry company. So you have to take care not to count them twice. Or there were also many people. One of them was Captain Pels. He's known from the book of Art Bloom on the Brigade, that began his career in the Jewish settlement police, and then he decided to join the army. But still, we arrive of a total number that is no less than 45,000 persons, and it is quite impressive.
Thank you, Samuele.
Okay.
And moving on, so we've explored how we get to the Jewish Brigade. Now, from a military history perspective, once the brigade gets to Italy, what were the key tactical and strategic engagements that they fought in? and what was the role, and what it might have been unappreciated at the time and not known to many, and what does this reveal about their effectiveness as a fighting force once they were deployed at the front?
That is a very good question, also because what we have in English or in Italian is quite problematic. So, what I'm going to speak about, of course, the most important source, but they are not the only one, come from the British Archive, the National Archive, but there is quite a lot in Hebrew from the Haganah, the Jewish half illegal striking force, from the Zionist archives in Jerusalem, and so on. And then we can get a little bit of a different perspective. Also, when we read the memories, often only in Hebrews, of the veteran. So, the Jewish Brigade Group, GBG, was officially established on August 29, 1944, following Winston Churchill's announcement in Parliament that the British government had accepted the Jewish Agency request to form a Jewish fighting unit. Brigadier Ernest Frank Benjamin, a Canadian-born Jewish officer with extensive service experience across the British Empire, was appointed its commander. Recruitment proved challenging, as everywhere in the British Empire and in England in 1944. General Harold Alexander, head of the 15th Army Group, threatened to supplement the brigade with 1,000 non-Jewish British soldiers if sufficient volunteers could not be found. His warning has the desired effect. More than 2,000 volunteers from mandatory Palestine enlisted between September 1944 and February 1945. Many of them recent high school graduates or even students still in high school. So at least 50% of the members of the Jewish Brigade group were in the average age between 18, some even 16, and 25. The Jewish Brigade was officially designated the Jewish Brigade Group, a term denoting an infantry brigade reinforced by auxiliary units, thus granting a degree of operational autonomy. Typically, a standard infantry brigade consisted of 3,000 to 4,000 men, whereas a reinforced brigade, as the Jewish Brigade Group, would number around 6,500 soldiers, which was the original plan, roughly a third of a full division. Therefore, in addition to its role as an operational fighting infantry brigade, the Jewish Brigade Group, together with the 3rd Jewish Battalion of the Palestine Regiment, also comprised Jewish artillery, engineer, transport, and numerous other support units. 2/3 of the artillery were made by Jewish soldiers and officers and commissioned officers, and 1/3 was supplied from a previous British existing unit. Non-Jewish British personnel also manned key support units, such as medical, ordnance, signal, provost services, adding over 500 to the Jewish Brigade Group. So if the number of the soldiers in the Jewish Brigade Group wavered between 4,500 to 5,000, maybe a little bit more, it's a little bit preposterous to say that the Jewish Brigade Group was not Jewish because of the 500 personnel in the supply in the ancillary units. The brigade faced difficult task of balancing the Jews living in Palestine, urgent desire to join the fight against the Nazis with the need for adequate military preparation. On September 20, 1944, its core battalion, the 3rd Infantry Battalion of the Palestine Regiment, assembled at Burg El Arab near Alexandria for a month of accelerated training. While British units typically required a year to become operational, the Jewish Brigade Group was formed and deployed in just 4 months. By late October, the brigade embarked from Egypt and landed in Taranto, Italy. before moving to Fuji, where it was joined by support units for further intensive training. Over the next 3 months, the brigade conducted field exercise in the Fuji area, adapting to diverse terrain and preparing combat operations. So let's arrive to the 3 phases of combat and strategic role. The Jewish Brigade Group operation in Italy unfolded in 3 distinct phases, each reflecting its growing involvement and effectiveness on the battlefield. Phase 1, initiation into combat, 4-24 March 1945. The Jewish Brigade Group was initially attached to the British 8th Army in 8th Infantry Division. Deployed to the Mezzana Alfonsina sector on the eastern edge of the Gothic line, the Jewish Brigade Group entered a relative quiet front marked by flat, canal-laced terrain. Facing them were experienced German units, the 362 Infantry Division, the 40 Regiment of the 42 Jäger Division, Austrian origin. Though not elite, this mid-tier division presented a serious threat, at least for the soldier of the Jewish Brigade Group. Initially, the brigade artillery remained inactive, while infantry units focused on reconnaissance, ambush, and light engagements. Gradually, their action became more aggressive. On 19-25 March, GB, Jewish Brigade Battalion carried out successful assault at Folsoveltro and La Giorgetta, supported by tanks of the Royal Irish Horse and divisional artillery. In this phase, the brigade artillery was still not operational. The attack improved tactical position and repelled German counterattack, marking the brigade's first combat success. Phase 2, main offensive operation, 27 March, 15 of April. In late March, the Jewish Brigade Group was transferred to the British 10th Corps, replacing the 43 Gurkha Brigade in the Bisrigella sector near Faenza. Here, the brigade operated alongside the reconstituted Italian group of Combattimento Friuli and was flanked by the Polish Carpathian and Kresova divisions. The new terrain was mountainous, with supply lines so constrained that mules were required to deliver provision to forward position. Now joined by its artillery regiment, the brigade faced elite German forces, specifically the 11 and 12 Sturm Regiment of the 4th Fallschirmjäger Division under the command of General Tretner, that after the war would become the Chief of Staff of the Federal Republic of Germany. It was highly trained, politically loyal, and exceptionally well-equipped unit. In the lead-up to the Allied offensive, the brigade maintained control of the no man's land across the Senio River through night patrol, ambushes, and frequent skirmishes. On 10 of April, the brigade joined a broad Allied push. Their mission was to cross the Senio, secure a bridgehead, and support the main Polish thrust toward Imola. Despite fierce German rearguard action, the Jewish Brigade Group pushed forward. The most intense combat came on 11 to 12 of April at Mulino Fantaguzzi and Mount Gabbio, where the 2nd and 3rd Battalion clashed with and defeated with a bayonet charge veteran German paratroopers. Phase 3, withdrawal and continued support. Mid-April 1945. While the infantry battalion were withdrawn from the front after April 15, the brigade support units, signal, artillery, and engineer remained active. The Jewish Brigade Group headquarters assumed command of an ad hoc formation, MAC GP force, tasked with holding the Monte Grande area near the boundary of the British and American Army. The 200 Jewish Artillery Regiment of the brigade continued to support the Italian Friuli advance, while the 343 Royal Engineer guarded critical supply roads north of the Senio River. The withdrawal of the infantry in the middle of April raised questions then and since. Soldiers believed that it was due to heavy casualties and a lack of reinforcement. While not critical, the brigade has sustained notable losses. Reportedly, General Mark Clark later told an Israeli journalist, "You Jews have already shed more than enough blood in this war." However, it seems the strategic factor played a more important role. According to the historian Yoav Gelber's monumental history of the volunteers in the British Army in Hebrew, the withdrawal was tied to the assignment of the British 10th Corps to reserve status in preparation for a planned crossing of the Po River. However, by the time the operation was set, German forces had already retreated, and other Allied units had entered the Po Valley. With Bologna captured and the 10th Corps objective fulfilled, the Jewish Brigade group was withdrawn along with the rest of the corps.
Thank you, Samuele. And
Two
now
last pictures, and that's of course have nothing to do with fighting. The first is the visit of Moshe Sharet, that was the head of the Jewish Agency, political department, and it was the ceremony that it was held the 3rd of April when the Zionist flag, what is today the flag of Israel, was displayed for the first time. Of course, there was a clear agreement with the British. The Jewish Brigade, as all the other Jewish units, would be demobilized outside Palestine, and so the Jewish flag or the Zionist flag would not have been shown. Is the celebration of the Seder at the front. The Passover week was between the 7th and the 14th of April in the days of the big offensive, and before the big offensive. And here we see the officer, the man celebrating Passover. Sorry.
No, thank you, Samuele. And one other question from my side, and we'll open then to audience Q&A. Beyond their combat roles, what unique contribution or challenges did the Jewish Brigade experience as a distinct unit, as you mentioned, within the broader Allied forces during the Italian campaign, especially considering the ongoing revelation of the Holocaust?
Okay. Even before arriving in Italy, Jewish soldiers again experienced in humanitarian outreach of Jewish community living under Axis rule. During campaign in Libya, they had engaged with local Jewish communities, recognizing early on that their mission extended beyond the battlefield. In liberated Italian cities, they encountered survivors from both local Jewish communities and camps holding refugees from former Yugoslavia. Jewish soldiers offered material assistance and served as mediator with Allied authorities. In November 1943, Palestinian Jewish soldiers encountered Austrian and German Jews interned in the Ferramonti Tarsia concentration camp. A few months later, in February 1944, they established a support center in Bari for 4,000 displaced Jews from Yugoslavia, staffed by members of Royal Army Service Corps Jewish companies. The liberation of Rome marked a turning point. It allowed Jewish soldiers to connect with the larger Jewish community in Italy and one of the most prominent in Europe. Units stationed in the capital included engineer and RAS companies, and they undertook several key initiatives. First, they reopened Vittorio Polacco Elementary School, where Jew Hebrew was taught, and founded a youth center at the Oratorio Via Balbo, offering class in Hebrew language and Jewish culture. They also revived Delasem, Delegation for the Assistance of Jewish Immigrants, a preferred Jewish aid organization, and established Akshara Training Center in Rome at Ponte di Nona and Valle Violata, where young refugees and local Jews prepared for agricultural life in the land of Israel. In October 1944, the refugee center in Bari was relocated and reopened in Rome as the Diaspora Center, support the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee. For the North, Jewish units assisted in towns such as Termoli, Siena, Florence, Livorno, and Arezzo, key areas during the Allied preparation for the final push against the Gothic line. In Tuscany, Jewish RASC and Royal Engineer units remained stationed from autumn 1944 until spring 1945. Their work included restoring infrastructure, reestablishing Jewish school, and locating hidden Jewish children sheltered in convents. In Florence, the 148 RASC Company founded Beit Chalutz, a Zionist youth center for cultural education and Aliyah preparation. In April 1945, a refugee center was also opened in Milan by Jewish soldiers in cooperation with the local Jewish community. By May, the Jewish Brigade group had been deployed to Tarvisio, near the Austrian and former Yugoslavian border. As Primo Levi recounted in If Not Now When, Jewish Brigade soldiers became the first to meet refugees arriving independently from Germany and Austria, many without formal documentation or institutional support. Initially, lacking clear orders, the soldier responded with initiative, distributing food, providing shelter, and transferring survivors to a makeshift camp at Pontebba. This site quickly evolved in a key reception center for thousands of Jewish refugees smuggled in front of the British zone in Austria, from the British zone in Austria. According to Israeli historian Yehuda Bauer, the Jewish Brigade helped around 50,000 Holocaust survivors reaching Italy through their efforts. From there, many were clandestinely boarded onto ships from mandatory Palestine, part of the broader Bricha and Aliyah Bet escape movement. Brigade soldiers organized transport, secured food and fuel, often through the black market, and established the first transit camps for survivors. They also opened summer camps for Jewish orphans across northern Italy, Milano, Bergamo, and Turin, and undertook efforts to retrieve hidden Jewish children from Christian institutions, reuniting them with their families. Perhaps most significant, Brigade members actively facilitate the illegal Jewish immigration to Palestine, still restricted by the British under the 1939 White Paper. Some soldiers, themselves Haganah emissaries, assisted refugees in reaching Italian port to board clandestine vessels. This activity, though known to the British command, led to the brigade reassignment to Northern Europe, first to the Netherlands, then to Belgium. Despite this relocation, many brigade members continued their efforts. Even after the mobilization in June 1946, several remained in Europe, working with operatives from the Haganah and fellow soldiers still stationed in Italy to sustain immigration operations. Thus, the Jewish Brigade contribution extended far beyond combat. It became a lifeline for Holocaust survivors and a key force in the post-war revival of Jewish life and nationhood.
Thank you, Samuele. And with that, we will, I know maybe we have a couple more slides to show before opening to question. I know we had...
Oh, that is the last. Yes, the two, almost the last, the Tarvisio, the parade held at Antwerp, even if it's very, very small contingent of soldiers from the land of Israel, Mandate Palestine, took part in the parade in London. And of course, you cannot end any lecture on the British Army without a few draws of John the Two Types, that you can understand also where the Jewish Brigade group operated, how was the general relationship with the population, and that's it.
Thank you, Samuele. If anyone has a question, please just you can open your mic and address Samuele directly.
I can break the ice if you like. Thank you for the very interesting talk. I have a very specific question. This is a data that I never was a detail that I was never able to find. Do you know was the commanding officer of the Palestine regiment? Have you ever found in the documents was the in charge of the Palestine regiment?
Of course. The list of the Palestinian officer, and of course British officer of the Palestinian regiment, you can find easily in the National Archives when you ask for the file of each battalion, as easy as that. Then, because the battalions were not together, one was in Egypt, another in Cyrenaica, the third one was in the land of Israel. As much as I know, they had not the colonel commanding the three battalions together, but each battalion had its own set of officers. Now, there was also, by the way, a fourth battalion, an Arab battalion, that by the beginning of 1945 somehow is no more existing. That's the interesting stuff. Also, I think that is important to say that no less than 12,000 Arabs living in Mandate Palestine joined the British Army. Some, the truth, most in the Palestine Police, in the Transjordanian Force, some in the Pioneer, and some in the Palestine Regiment. Now, going back to the officer, in 1942, the Jewish officers from Palestine were generally low-rank lieutenants. By 1943, most of the low and middle rank officers till the rank of major were Jews from Palestine. That means that the British were quite honest in keeping with their promises. And by the end of the story of the British Jewish Brigade group, with 1, 2, 3 officers in the general headquarters, most of the officers were Jewish Palestinians. There were, of course, a few officers that were Jewish British or, of course, Jewish Canadians, such as Benjamin. But the almost totality of officers were Jewish Palestinians. And there is a very interesting document from the Haganah archives that showed that they made a list in 1947 when they wanted to transform the Haganah from a militia to a real field army. They made a list, and it's quite impressive, of all the Jewish officers from Palestine in the British Army, and the number is quite low.
So, wow, that's the difference between a military historian and a non-military historian. I wasn't even sure what rank was supposed to command a regiment. You tell me now it's a colonel, which I couldn't find. So the reason is because they were not together, so they didn't have a commanding officer as a regiment. That's what you said.
No, that's first point. Second point, there were major, there were other colonels, but the most important officer, do you mind, Guido, if I'm going back with the slides?
No. Go. Yeah. You can absolutely click back.
I want to show, because this is a very interesting figure, and this is Brigadier General Kish of the Royal Engineer. I mean, not just an officer. He had for a while the Royal Engineers till he died jumping on a mine in Tunisia. He had a very interesting story. He came from a British family. He served during the First World War in the Indian Army. At the beginning, still during the First World War, most Jewish officers and the first Jewish Victoria Cross come from the British Army in India. Then, after the war, he became Zionist. He emigrated to Mandate, Palestine, and he left the army. Called back in 1939 from the beginning. He commanded the Royal Engineer, and he is well known because in the time of the Battle of El Alamein, he organized the water infrastructure of the British 8th Army. So all potable water that, of course, in desert condition is very important, that was his job.
You know, his family. I think it was mentioned in a parliamentary debate in the House of Commons, if I'm not mistaken, as an example of a soldier from Palestine who had given a major contribution, or when he was already dead. It was mentioned, yeah, later on. I think if it's the, I'm just recalling by memory, yeah, by heart. Yeah.
Thank you. Anyone else has a question from the audience?
So I wanted to ask, what was the benefit or the involvement of the former, not only the Jewish Brigade, but like in any other military, there were probably 10 times that number of Jews from Palestine who were essentially volunteering to fight in the war, but were not on the front line. You know, they were in all the support units, as you talked about. So the question I have is, what fraction, or is there an understanding of the role that the training and the experience of the brigade and also all the support units that played into the ultimate Israeli War of Independence? So the army training that they received, how many of them, or to what extent were they key, did they become key players in the development of the ultimate Israeli army that, that's what
is a very good question. Let's say like that. There were 30,000 volunteers that came back with a lot of experience. The problem that the Haganah, the Jewish underground army, also because of its experience during the Arab Rebellion, was not very eager to give command roles to the veteran of the British Army. On the contrary, there were quite clashes before, during, and after the Second World War. What happened that slowly, many Haganah members decide to join the armed force. Anyway, they wanted to control politically the soldiers, and most of them, of course, not everyone, switched camp. So by the end of the war, most of these volunteers, of course, not all that were members of the Haganah, had very well understood what would have been their contribution in the future war of independence. First of all, it made also clear that was going to be a fight for power between the old Haganah men and not always the so young personnel of the British Army. The point that Ben-Gurion give as much as possible the priority to people that served in the British Army, were close related to the British Army, and so the first thing was the transformation from a roughly organized militia, even before the beginning of the Independence War, before the declaration of independence, in a real army, at least on paper, divided in brigades. It's interesting that Israeli army still today is divided not in divisions, but in brigades. I mean, you understand why it was so important, also from the organization. Second was first and foremost the contribution of the volunteer in the engineer, supply, medical, women corps. Till the 60s, and by the way, the 70s, most of the standing Israeli army officer, engineers, female corps, and so on, had begun their career in the British Army. So all the auxiliary units of the Israeli army, you can see by the way in their badges, and their insignia, had British officer and a British frame. With the infantry, it was more complicated. First of all, because at the end, there were only 3,000 Jews from Palestine that served in the infantry. It's not such a big number. Then, on one hand, they had a very good training, but once we come to fight, we are speaking of the Italian campaign. The conditions of fighting were not so different from those of the First World War. So theoretically, they know about tank and their support. In fact, they digged trench and assaulted the German paratroops with bayonets. That was perfect for the Israeli War of Independence. You did not need any more, also because almost till the end, the Israel Defense Force had almost no tanks and planes. Things changed in the 50s. But that is interesting because it means that inside the infantry, there was always a confrontation between the officer of the Haganah that they created their own striking force, the Palmach, that they were also very leftist, and the men of the Jewish Brigade group that you can imagine were less influenced by political decision. At the end, Ben-Gurion made things easy. Toward the end of the war independence, he decided to dissolve this striking force, the Palmach. Yitzhak Rabin, for example, was one of its commanding officers, and he slowly put also inside the infantry as much as possible power in the hands of the veterans from the British Army. Did I answer you the question?
Yeah. I mean, it's not simple.
No. By the way, there were also many Jews that come to help from England, South Africa, United States, especially in the Air Force, in the Navy, some even in the Armored Corps. There were no armored units among the volunteers. And also between them and not so much the veterans of the British Army, but the other member of the Haganah, the relationship was not always so good.
I have one more question on my end, Samuele. Similar question I've asked other guests of our webinars. What is the level of understanding or knowledge among young Jews in Israel today about the Jewish Brigade? Is it widespread knowledge that they contributed to the Italian campaign? Is this studied the high school history books, or what is the level of understanding and commemoration of the contribution among young Israeli?
Oh, in the last year, it improved a little bit. But for most of the time, also because the Jewish volunteers in the British Army were mobilized outside of Palestine, were something folkloristic, something interesting, but they were never a real focus. Things were changed in the 80s when Gelber, this Israeli historian, published his monumental history of the volunteer movement, but of course it is all in Hebrew. And slowly, they also made a very important exhibit at the Diaspora Museum in Tel Aviv called The Living Bridge, on the relationship between the Jewish volunteers and the Holocaust survivors. And so slowly, it take a more important place in Jewish consciousness. But we have to remember that the Jewish Brigade group in Jewish consciousness in Israel have also other, let's say, adversaries. For example, the Jewish partisans in Eastern Europe. That was one of the founding myths of Israel, especially at the beginning. And I can tell you but that is, of course, in my own house. When my two children joined the Israeli army and both went to the infantry, they came home, and when they graduated, Dad, I joined the British Army. You can be proud of ourselves. So, but was because of me, not because what they studied at school.
Very clear. Thank you. I don't know if there's any last minute question from anybody in the audience. Otherwise, we're almost at the hour. Anyone else before we close?
Perhaps not on the Jewish Brigade, but given the situation, I think before this ban, before leaving this gathering, we should ask Professor Rocca about his personal safety, given the situation that is, Israel is going through, and whether are you in any danger in this moment? I mean, because of the war.
I understand. Well, it's part of life. You chose your path and you are where you are supposed to be. I was supposed to be now in Europe, enjoy nice cafe on the Riviera of the Lake of Garda, but it looks like that I shall wait hopefully a little bit more before arriving there.
Okay, so
let me ask one last quick thing. Is there, or are there, brigade associations in Israel today or anywhere that, like Guido's doing, I'm doing, try to unify and preserve the memorialization of the people who fought then? So,
of course. And I'm in touch with them because it's important to collect their memory, as you can understand. These associations were established immediately after the end of the Second World War, still at the time of the mandate. And they were relatively silent but powerful. Powerful because slowly with time, many of these veterans become important persons in the Israeli industrial world, in the Israeli commercial world, of course, in medical and in the academy. So still today, we have an association of Israeli war veteran of the Jewish Brigade group. And there are not, as you can imagine, so many members still alive, but we try to collect their memories. And what it can be even more interesting, you know, when you speak of two Jews, you have always three different opinions. Even there is an umbrella organization. Veterans try to meet around only with people of the units which they served. So when I was a young man and I arrived in Israel, I was always invited by my cousin, the served in Royal Engineers, in his association. Then inside the Jewish Brigade group, you have different veteran associations, of course, all under the same umbrella. Also because the three battalions had different experience and a different social economical composition. So the most active, also the most young, was the 3rd Battalion. Also is because was still forming when the Jewish Brigade group was created. They got many, of course, not of all the young people. So most of the survivor, for example, people that are still alive today, come from there.
All right. Is it possible that you could send through Guido the name and any kind of contact or web page or anything in order to link or somehow get engaged with one or more of those associations?
Of course. By the way, the best way to do it in a formal way, I try to give you also less informal, is we have 2 museums of Jewish participation in the First and the Second World War. The most important museum is today is the Museum of Latun, that is also the Armored Corps Museum. And then they can put you in contact. Other is the Jewish Brigade Museum, also the Jewish Legion Museum in Netanya is much more smaller, but they have also the address of many of its veterans. If not, if you would like to give to Guido your email, I shall provide you with the contacts that I have, of course.
And by the way, yeah, we will make the connection. We will also post some of the links to the public website of the museums together with the recording, so everybody can sort of further explore. And with that, I mean, again, thank you, Samuele, for joining us. It was extremely insightful. Thank you, everybody, for your questions. And again, give us a few days. We'll be posting the recording together with the links. And, you know, please, if anyone is now following us on our newsletter, we publish once a month. And next month, which is, I mean, this month, June, will be dedicated to Italy, to the co-belligerent army, another fairly unknown story to most, but a very big contribution to the campaign. And again, with the rest of the year, each following month will be a different country. So feel free to follow us via the newsletter. Thanks again, everybody.
Thanks, Guido.